Good morning, everyone, and welcome. So my name is Gaia. I'm the co-founder and the program manager here at Icebreaker-1, and we're an independent, non-partisan, non-profit with a mission to make data work harder to deliver net zero. And so here at Icebreaker-1, what we're doing is we're creating a web of net zero data. So we're connecting financial, engineering, and environmental data to help inform net zero decisions. Much of this data is restricted. So what we're doing is we're enabling that web by creating policies and guardrails that ensure that data is comparable, machine readable, and trusted. And in order to achieve this, we're working across industries and governments. So we're here to talk about open energy today, and open energy is our flagship program. We're working with industry to develop a service that makes it easy to search, access, and securely share energy data. By developing open standards and through collaboration, open energy can help bring together data held by thousands of organizations to unlock the sector-wide innovation. Today, we're here to talk about the future of regulation in the energy sector. And we're having this webinar at an incredibly interesting time and an incredibly challenging time. I'm sure most of you have seen the news this morning. We've also seen drastic changes in the energy markets recently, and we've also had some interesting things published. So ranging from the Energy Digitalisation Task Force findings through to the fact that the networks have recently submitted their business plans to Ofgem, and literally next week, the Strategic Innovation Fund programs that are co-funded by Ofgem and UKRI are kicking off. Not to mention this particular phase development with open energy is wrapping up at the end of this month. So in light of all this, I'm going to pass to our illustrious speakers to introduce themselves. So on the panel today, we have Sarah Vaughan from Elexon, we have Liam Bennett from Ofgem, and we have Charlotte Hillenbrand from Icebreaker-1. So I'll pass to Sarah.
Thank you, Gaia. And as you say, quite a momentous and potentially quite difficult day for energy today. So as Gaia said, I'm Sarah Vaughan. I have been on the board of Elexon since 2019, and I am currently serving as its interim CEO. For those of you who may not know Elexon is the code manager for the balancing and settlements code, which fundamentally means we manage electricity settlement in Great Britain. Our purpose is serving at the heart of the energy industry, building a path to net zero. So as you can see, what we do is very congruent with what Icebreaker-1 is seeking to do. We're also the implementation manager for market-wide half-hourly settlement, which will be the biggest change in the retail market since the late 1990s when competition began. We're a data-driven business, which is currently at the moment undergoing its own digital transformation. And interestingly, I was going through the participants list just before we started, and there are certainly a lot of sort of old friends and names that I recognise from my career in the industry on there. So great to be here with you all. I'm really pleased to be here today looking at DNOs and data. I remember buying a DNO in 1998. It was called a PES at the time, a public electricity supplier, and it was made up of both supply and distribution in one company. And at the time, as a competition lawyer, my job was to explain to the competition authorities why we wanted to buy it and why it was a good idea that we, as a generator, PowerGen, should be allowed to buy East Midlands Electricity, which is now part of WPD. So on the positive side, it was about talking about the business case. And on the potentially less positive side, it was about convincing the competition authorities that there were no detriments if they let us go ahead. So in terms of that business case, it was easy for supply. So there were arguments about vertical integration, swings and roundabouts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Distribution was actually more challenging, not in terms of the risks, but in terms of why we as a generator were buying it. The whole point at the time was that the distribution network was seen as passive. It was basically a conduit for getting power from one place to another. So in the end, in my submission, I settled for an argument about the steady stream of earnings that it would provide as a regulated business to balance the volatility on the supply side. Well, if we fast forward to today, or perhaps tomorrow, wow, how things have changed. In the last decade, the usage patterns of Britain's local electricity distribution networks have changed so rapidly. There's been a sharp increase in more low carbon generation connecting to local networks as both consumers and businesses invest in their own generation equipment. Distribution networks now must be much more actively managed by DSOs managing electricity flows from a wide range of low carbon generators and storage. And in a DSO model, the very last thing that the network will be is passive. It will be sitting at the center of thousands of potential interactions, playing host to a variety of different distributed energy resources and enabling flexibility transactions as an alternative to just investing in more network capacity. And the key to this, of course, is and will be data and digitalization. The networks need to know where the assets are. The investors and developers need to know where the opportunities are. And consumers need to know that this is all possible and that if they want to get involved, there will be as little friction as possible in their doing so. Greater data visibility and open data are essential steps towards the digital transformation of the energy sector and of accelerating the drive to net zero. And all of that is why I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you, Gaia.
Thank you, Sarah, for that absolutely amazing introduction and for reminding us that today is the simplest things are ever going to be, and they will continue to get more and more complex, but that's a world filled with opportunities. So I'll pass to our next panelist to introduce himself. Liam, over to you.
Thanks, Gaia, and thanks, Sarah, and thank you everyone for allowing Ofgem to be represented on the panel today. I think it's very good timing considering the recent digitalisation task force report, the ED2 price control, and a really good time to reflect on the last few years in the digital energy sector. We've seen some very good progress from the DNOs and other parts of the market on digital capabilities and digital culture, but I think we're all aware that we have a long way to go, a long and exciting journey to make sure those consumer and system benefits are realised, not least through things like DSO functions, as Sarah highlighted. The pace of change is really accelerating quite rapidly, and Ofgem are trying to drive this change forward through our data and digitalisation strategic change programme. So that cuts across both what industry is doing and our internal digital journey, and we're changing our culture, appointing our chief data officer last year, but also just recently taking the world leading step to establish a digitalisation and decentralisation team in Ofgem, which we believe is a world first for a regulator and really gives prominence both internally and externally to the digitalisation of the energy sector. Obviously, many in this meeting will be aware of our licence reforms as part of RIIO-2 and our intentions to continue those in ED2, helping deliver the Energy Data Task Force recommendations through our digitalisation licence condition. But we also made a commitment to carry out a data and digital market review and looking at emerging and existing monopolies. And government and Ofgem are promoting digitalisation in the market, and we really want to show up on by DNOs. So part of what I was asked to do today is to try and give a future look for DNOs. How will things change over the next 10 years? And whilst I don't have a crystal ball, though I wish I did, I understand the importance of regulatory certainty for a market, and especially a nascent market like the digital energy sector. So fundamentally, by 2030, I think businesses will have to be digital by design. They'll need to have people internally with real digital skills, and they'll have to upskill those who don't have them. Those people will be the lifeblood of the DNOs, and they're going to drive the advanced decision making, the faster decision making available to senior leaders. The companies themselves will have to be able to ingest, transform, and utilize data, but also respect that their data has users of its own, and those users have specific needs, including Ofgem. This isn't a change in who DNOs are. They're still going to be these expert engineering firms who steward the networks for consumers. This is just a redesign of how they look internally and how they use data to facilitate decision making. And so to get to 2030 from now, what do we need to do? we think the ED2 business plans are a really good start. There's great infrastructure being proposed there and good capabilities to build that digital by design organization, particularly with regards to open data platforms and establishment of analytical capabilities. The ED2 business plans look to set DNOs up for success in ED3 and beyond, which is when we're really going to see that huge growth in new connections from low carbon technologies and huge amounts of flexibility needed to be provided by low voltage networks. And I think the last thing to kind of point for DNOs is really the idea that you will be a conduit of energy system data. That data that lies there now and is being surfaced through visibility rollout will have to flow up through you to the energy system, but you will also need to take in energy system data to make your decision making more effective. So I really see DNOs and DSOs as a conduit for the future digital energy system. But you can't treat DNOs on their own just as an individual. They have to be part of a wider system. And I think that wider system probably needs kind of 3 key points to deliver in the next 10 years. I think the first is common data and metadata standards. So I note that Ofgem recently published a letter on the common information model for the long-term development statement for DNOs. We think this is a strong step for us, and we think future standards will also be valuable. Minimum standards for data quality. Everyone in the digital energy sector needs to know that the data they receive is accessible and acceptable. And we've seen this focus on data quality in ED2. And also you need clearly articulated roles and responsibilities in the sector. You need to reduce risk, we need increased regulatory certainty, and we need to understand who you interact with to get what you need to operate in that future system. And that operation requires interfaces between different parts. And we like to see the approach DNOs are taking, engaging with external providers such as Open Energy to find common interfaces. There's a danger, I think, here that we all build in our silos. Every organization builds its own open data platform that don't really communicate with each other very well. So very excited to see kind of a growth in that common data sharing space. And I think it's absolutely fundamental to meet the growth in renewables that we're likely to see in the late 2020s into the early 2030s. I think I want to close up by just saying this is a journey. We've been on quite a journey so far from the data task force into the digitalization task force. And we've taken quite an open approach to our regulation, collaborating with the sector and with DNOs as well. We want to take that forward. I think collaborative and iterative design is the only way we'll get the energy system we all envisage. So yes, our door is open. We want to design this system with you. Come and help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. I think the points you raised there about this being a journey that needs to be collaborative and that we're leading to something that needs to be digital by design is so important. So thank you so much. And so I'll pass on to our final panelist to introduce herself. Charlotte, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlotte Hillenbrand and I'm product strategist at Icebreaker-1. I'm working with a team of designers and developers to develop out the Open Energy service. And we've been working with industry and the energy community to build the service. So very much leading from Liam's point about collaboration. Net zero future is a very complex, multifaceted challenge for us all. So we have to really kind of work together and really understand what the industry needs and what the kind of future looks like. And we can only imagine that together. So in developing Open Energy, we're taking a business and user and strategic perspective, marrying all of these kind of facets to create something that can really serve all these kind of future needs. And as somebody who's worked in digital innovation and digital product for over 15 years, the challenge is always, where do we start? I've encountered lots of clients where the conversations have been rolling for a couple of years and the problems are kind of somewhat known, but the starting point is still evades the teams. So that's where Open Energy is really trying to help DNOs and other players in the sector to get started. So with Open Energy, you can dive in and start accessing data, start finding open and shared data sets. And you can, start to see who else in the community is kind of active on Open Energy. And we've really tried as much as we can to facilitate DNOs to operationalise their data best practice, that's laid out in the RIIO-2 guidelines. There's a slide in this deck that you can take away later that just kind of tells you here are the ways in which data best practice is kind of answered within open energy, because we recognise that this is a really complex space, and so what we're really trying to do is remove as much friction as we can and to get to value as quickly as possible. And the ways in which we're doing that, so this diagram just seeks to kind of summarise the kind of component parts of open energy. So you can see you've got the search at the core, but it's underpinned by standardising metadata around how we're describing that data so that then it's more readily indexed and found. Data licensing, of course, at the moment we have over 200 data sets in open energy which are shared or open data, but the intention is to progress across the data spectrum to incorporate commercial data, because as we've heard from Sarah and Liam, the more those kind of the assets and opportunities are surfaced across the ecosystem, the quicker we're all going to kind of be able to get towards the net zero future and kind of solve those problems. So we're really trying to help progress these things by solving some of the knotty problems. So data licensing would be one of them, but also use cases is another one. So we as a team are looking at what are the most common use cases, and we're working with our advisory groups and steering groups to identify those so that we're taking a more kind of holistic approach across the industry around what are the most common problems that are coming up. So that's just a bit of a quick intro to open energy, and I'll pass back to Gaia.
Thank you, Charlotte. So what I'd actually like to do at this point is to invite everybody to start posting questions for the question and answer session in the chat. And in the meantime, if we could launch poll 1. So this is interesting. I'm going to give it a couple of seconds for everyone to reply. So here we're just asking you what best describes your work. So we'd like to understand sort of the sectors that you work in. And it looks like we've got some DNO representation, some sort of R&D, policy and regulatory. Oh, we've got a really big spread actually. I will share these results with everybody shortly, but I'll just give it about another 10 seconds for anyone who hasn't participated in the poll to give it a go. And Jim, I've seen your message in the chat. If you want to tick more than one box, or you've missed the opportunity to tick more than one box, you can also paste in the chat with the extra things that you wanted to. But I think you can select multiples in this. Great. So if we can share the results of that poll. So as we can see, we've got a pretty big spread of people in the audience, but the two at the top are policy and regulatory and R&D and technical. So interesting times ahead. So whilst we wait for questions from the audience, this Q&A session, I'm actually just going to start out by asking each of our panelists the same question to get us started. I think I'll come to Sarah first for this one. So in terms of, we're facing quite an interesting time that we've talked about at the moment here with the energy sector in the UK, and we're looking 5 years ahead at the moment. So Sarah, what would you say that the best and worst case scenarios where we could go in the next 5 years are? Where could DNOs be in 5 years' time?
Thank you for that, Gaia. That's a marvellous question. I think you focused it down to DNOs at the end. I think I saw the question at first in a broader sense around where the industry could be. And in that context, I think it's really important the fact that we're in an energy transition at the moment. And clearly what that transition means is that at the same time as we're trying to invest in renewables, in nuclear, and in things that and distributed energy resources, all the things that drive us towards net zero, at the same time we are still remaining to a certain extent dependent on gas And I think that brings us back to the comments you made at the beginning around the impacts that the current situation will have on the gas price. My fear, when you couple that with the sort of cost of living crisis that we're seeing more generally at the moment, is around political will to keep pushing forward. We know that there are some members of parliament already who are talking about slowing down the drive to net zero. Now, of course, we will never get to net zero unless we drive for it. And once we get to, on that path, then we reduce our dependency on gas and on its volatility. So it ends up being a bit of a vicious circle, I think, if you don't push ahead. That isn't the question you ask, and I completely appreciate that. I think it is linked, though, to the fact that one of the premises that we're all looking at is that there is a much, much greater role for electrification in the future. And clearly, when we're talking about DNOs, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about greater role for electric cars, a greater role for electric heating, etc. So we have to keep that investment going to continue on that path. And therefore, for me, I think Liam touched on it. It's around the sort of what every regulated body needs is a degree of certainty in terms of future policy. And therefore, what we need is not to have people starting asking questions about, are we going to change horses halfway through? Are we going to come off this path? We need to have a continuing pressing forward on, electrification is part of the answer. It's not the only answer. We've got hydrogen and other things that we're looking at, but electrification is definitely part of the answer, that we're looking at decarbonising, that we're looking at continuing with greater distributed renewable and low carbon generation, and just keep that message going out there. That's what I'd really like to see.
Thank you, Sarah. Just before I pass to Liam and then Charlotte, as I'd like to get all your thoughts on this, I'm just going to answer one quick question that's come up in the chat around is the idea of open energy to create an index or a central depository and duplication. I'd just like to emphasise that we are focused on indexing what's already out there, and we're focused on connecting, not collecting. So we are very much at the heart of open energy, doing everything we can to avoid all duplication. We are not trying to build a centralized repository of anything. So Liam, at this point, I'll pass to you, as I'd love to hear your thoughts from Ofgem about where we're headed and what the best case scenario and possibly what the worst case scenario is for where we could go.
Thanks, Gaia. Yeah, I think I echo Sarah's comments. I think there's certainly some risks here around stopping that drive towards net zero. And I just don't think that's very sensible. I think for me, one of the key best case scenarios that we would get would be a diversification in the type of business models in the energy market. I think part of some of the issues we're seeing is certainly there's a kind of a lack of diversity there, and then therefore a lack of true value for consumers to engage. So we're definitely seeing some issues across the sector. And I think digitalization is the route to that, to be honest. I think it's driving that open data up through the DNOs and up through other systems to provide value. I think the worst case scenario for me is, obviously, if we don't hit net zero, that's an absolute disaster. And if we lose the impetus, that's awful. But I think it's if we keep progressing and we progress in silos, and we all think in our individual parts of the system we're building the right thing, but none of it interacts at the end of the day. We don't really get that true value to the system, and we end up either overbuilding or we just fundamentally don't get there. So I think that building in silos and a lack of a whole systems view is probably where we get to a worst case scenario.
Thank you, Liam. I really echo that. The need for a whole systems view and collaboration across the whole system is really essential. Charlotte, what are your thoughts?
I guess I would probably, not being a kind of energy industry expert, I would probably come at it from more of a systems thinking, digital innovation perspective, and also possibly a bit of a consumer perspective. In that case, the best case scenario is echoing what Liam said around setting aside competition as far as is possible in the interests of delivering a much more kind of unified data sharing fabric and something that's universally visible and accessible, so that it kind of doesn't matter which actor you are within that system, you can access the data that you need, and that it's serving the bigger goal of a net zero future. And I guess the worst case scenario is that the kind of the paralysis of making a start means that industry continues to kind of be a step behind demand, and so supply and demand can continue to be out of sync, and yeah, that the kind of drive forward falters.
Thanks, Charlotte. Liam, I'd actually like to pick up on something that you mentioned in your opening remarks, if possible. So one of the things that you mentioned is, whilst you've been reviewing the business plans that have been submitted under this sort of RIIO-2, there's been lots of mentions of data portals and kind of individual data sharing platforms from the DNOs they're recognising the importance of digitalisation, and there's a lot of mention of creating individual data sharing platforms. What are your thoughts on this? What could the benefits or the drawbacks be?
So I think each DNO having its own data sharing platform is definitely a good starting position. I think they need a position to make this data available to consumers, to stakeholders, to Ofgem. I think these are really positive steps. My push, I suppose, for DNOs would then be, well, how do we use those open data platforms? And I think we should take a common approach there. Whether it be through an open network project approach, or whether it be through a third-party approach. I think making sure myself as a stakeholder, as an Ofgem stakeholder, or say a flexibility provider, can go and access each of those different data platforms and know what data they're going to get in the right fashion, in the right timeliness. So I think it's all about making sure those platforms are interoperable and not just building in their silo. That would be my plea to DNOs.
Thanks, Liam. I think that's really helpful. I might actually just follow that up really quickly with a question we've had in the chat, which is around how will regulation support those changes in the siloed culture that you've mentioned?
So I think what we're trying to do in the data and digitalization space certainly is establish more communication between the DNOs. So we have our data and digitalization steering group between ourselves, the network companies, and BEIS. So trying to make sure that this is being considered there adequately. I think there's places for standards in the future. It's not something we've currently got on the table, but standards are definitely something the sector is going to need. And I think we can put weight on them through our draft determination and final determinations procedures if we think something is really missing. So I think much with anything in the data and digitalization sector, it's around communication, making sure everyone's speaking to each other and building those common platforms.
Thanks, Liam. That's really helpful. And my next question is actually for Charlotte. And one of the things that I'd really like to know from your perspective, Charlotte, is you've been really involved in the development of open energy, and particularly kind of the service side of things. How, from your perspective, how will better data sharing and digitalization help us support our net zero goals? Obviously, we've had mentions in the previous answers about how the worst case scenario is we just don't achieve net zero. But one of the things that we're looking at the moment is a rapid level of change that is helping us drive towards data and digitalization.
Yeah, so I think it's really about bringing in a much more complete picture. We've been hearing a lot about silos and about a more kind of individualistic approach to things. And the problem with that is that you lose that diversity of perspective, but you also lose the kind of inbound sources of data and information that would enable you to make a kind of more kind of complete response or solution to something. So, I think it's data sharing, like better data sharing and digitalization really helps in building up that picture. But also to Liam's point about communication, coming together as sector leaders to define, what are the ways in which we can meaningfully tackle net zero? What are the use cases that we can that we can identify now and start to progress on, because as we all know, change takes time, change is a journey. Also, change happens with people within organisations. So if we can bring those people together and surface the data to them, then I think that's a much better opportunity to tackle net zero goals.
Thank you, Charlotte. And Sarah, as our resident big thinker and kind of human who knows all about all of the things in my mind, I'm going to pass to you to get your perspective on this as well.
Sorry, Gaia, I was can you just run the question past me again, because I was thinking about all the other questions that are in the chat. Apologies.
Absolutely. So my question for you is around how will better data sharing and digitalisation help us support net zero goals?
Oh, I mean, it's fundamental. I think it's absolutely fundamental to it. I mean, in my introduction, I was talking about the way the world is changing. I think sort of in the olden days, we had a very much a centralized command and control structure, where the sort of the ESO could sit in the middle, and you could have your generation coming over here and your supply coming over here, and actually not that much role for customers, for the end customer. One of the things we always struggled with was the sort of the demand side response type of reaction in the market and getting that up and running. I think what data and digitalization does is it absolutely frees that up as a possibility for the future, so that you can develop a really, really strong demand side through distributed energy resources, and empower actually both end customers and businesses to play their own part in that. And what that can mean, I mean, clearly we'll be encouraging that those resources should be low carbon resources, so that can help drive to net zero. But also, if you've got the possibility through flexibility and through active flexibility markets to have some demand turned down instead of having to put on additional generation, then all of that will help to lead to a much more efficient net zero system for the future. So, but unless you know where it is, and unless you can make it part of your sort of total algorithm to balance, you can't use it. So I think it's about visibility, it's about accessibility, and about access. So it's all of those things that are all made possible actually by digitalization and by access to data. It's fundamental. I don't think we can do it without it.
Thank you, Sarah. That's a really powerful point. Charlotte, we've had a question in the chat that I feel you can talk to incredibly well. Someone here has asked for a practical example of a best practice where open data has or can be used to de-silo information and push forward digital transformation. Could you put things in context, for example, EV charging or flexibility?
Absolutely. Well, it's funny you should say that, because one of the use cases that Open Energy have been defining in consultation with over 50 players within the energy community is that of the EV use case. Gaia, could you just pull up that slide for me? Thank you. So we've defined the use case as a connection department of a DNO needs to know when and where charge points are likely to appear across their network, the corresponding usage or consumption patterns for each charge point or type of charge point, and the aggregate demand, so that they can better manage electricity distribution now and in the future. So I think this really speaks to the challenge that Sarah referenced earlier, and Liam as well, about the pace of change and the need to keep up with that change. So Open Energy, how does it help? So if you imagine you are part of that team who've been tasked with figuring out, mapping where should we be putting these charge points? Where's the demand? Where can we kind of realistically and responsibly place these charge points, it's possible that that data might exist within the DNO, but it's possible that it doesn't. And actually, I've just noticed in the comments that DNOs don't always have the access to that data that they really need. So the idea is that you would come to Open Energy, and then you can discover multi-source data around electric vehicle charge points. And not only can you discover that data, but you can also see, who is the kind of owner of that data. And that gives you the opportunity and the visibility of who else is kind of surfacing data in this particular use case, so that you could then contact them, get in touch with them, and start to collaborate around building a more kind of enriched data picture around EV charge points. If then the DNO decide that they want to share the data that they do have, there's a kind of verification process on the Open Energy service that we're working on at the moment. We're still in pilot, but once we're kind of more operational, you will be able to verify the identity of the organisation that you're in, but also that gives you the surety that the other actors in the system who are potentially requesting your data have been verified. And just to reinforce the point made earlier, we're indexing and connecting data. We are not collecting data, so the data will always remain with the kind of data owner on their systems. But what we're really facilitating is that kind of connection of, okay, you've got this data set, I really need that, and I've got this, and you need. So let's kind of let's connect and kind of transact through Open Energy, and in that way you can build the picture, ingest the data you need, and start to map. So the idea with these use cases that we're uncovering is that we're really trying to tackle very real and present challenges, and build out Open Energy to respond very directly to them. Back to you, Gaia.
Thank you, Charlotte. So I'm going to start wrapping up our Q&A, and I really want to leave enough time for closing remarks from our panelists as well. But I have one final question that I really have to pose to Sarah and Liam. So I have just a few sentences. If you had one last message or a piece of advice for the DNOs in terms of what first step they could take today, what would it be? Liam, I'll come to you first.
Thanks. Yeah, I think deliver on your ED2 business plans would be the main thing to send home to me. That is the priority. That sets us up for success both in the wider industry, but in yourselves for ED2 and ED3 and beyond. Continue those conversations taking place in the open networks forums and the DDSG, and with third parties like Open Energy, to drive those common approaches and really kind of take a step back sometimes, see the woods for the trees, work with us on this. And I think, yeah, that would probably sum up what the DNOs need to do. Upskill internally as well. I think, build that capabilities, build up those people onboarding, and you'll get a great transition internally.
Thank you, Liam. And Sarah, again, same question.
Thank you. Thanks, Gaia. I think this is a transformation. This is a huge transformation, and I think that what I would suggest, and I think Liam has driven this message quite strongly. It's around this silos point, not to try to do it on your own. That it is not ultimately of benefit if we end up in a situation where each DNO turning into a DSO has got this absolutely fantastic portal, but it's only good for that DSO. That is not going to drive the real transformational change that we need across the country as a whole. And therefore, for that reason, I would urge, and here I should declare an interest. I have been involved in Icebreaker, but I would urge the DSOs to really sort of lean in to what is out there. Things like the Open Energy programme that are seeking to develop something that will help them on this journey. If you go onto the Open Energy website, you will see the way that they have mapped against the digitalisation task force recommendations, the way in which open energy can help. Similarly, with the Ofgem's data best principles, that piece of work has also been done. And there are many people out there who've been doing the thinking and who have been looking into this. So, you know, it's sort of, please don't struggle on your own, collaborate, but collaborate with people who've, you know, really been working on this.
Thank you, Sarah. Just before I come to incredibly speedy closing remarks from each of our panelists for today, and thank you all for joining us. If we didn't get to your question, we will be able to respond, so you can either get in touch via our email or we'll incorporate it into our FAQ. Can we just really quickly have the last two polls? So this next set of polls is actually poll 2, and if you scroll down, there's a third poll. There's 2 questions here. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that, and actually, whilst you're all clicking on these things, I'm going to pass to Charlotte. Charlotte, how would you like to wrap up today? What's your one key takeaway?
I would say, you know, don't be shy. Like, step in, formulate the wicked problems that you're trying to solve as a business, and have a look at open energy and see how we can start to help you address them. You know, see the data sets that we've got there already, and please get in touch with us if the data that you really would love to see there is not available, because, you know, again, for us to really understand what the demand is would be very helpful. So yeah, please get involved.
Thank you, Charlotte. Liam, what about from yourself?
I think a good reflection is a lot of change in the energy system, but a very exciting time. I think for me, open data sharing is more crucial than ever. It really adheres to our data best practice principles, and we want to see as many people engaged with that as possible in the market. These kind of solutions only work when they have users who need that information.
I think we're breaking up a little bit there. Sorry, Liam, we lost you right at the end.
Everyone should be engaging with these kind of principles and these kind of open sharing solutions. This is how we're going to drive change in the energy sector.
Amazing, thank you. Sarah, what about you?
Thank you. If you'll indulge me for 30 seconds, I'm just going to start with an Elexon specific point to respond to Dan Thomas's question around open data. And just to say that Elexon was actually the first code body to put through a modification to such that all data held by Elexon is assumed to be openly available, is presumed open in accordance with the recommendations of the Data Task Force. So just to sort of put a line under that one, but I think that actually reinforces the message that I would like to leave people with, which is around, you know, open energy data as a force for public good. If you think about the challenges that we've got in front of us, it is so important that we do have both the visibility of that data and the access to that data. And so that, I mean, fundamentally, that would be the message that I would want to leave with people. This is about a culture change. It is about a transformation, but we all have to lean into it to make it happen.
Thank you, Sarah. So from my perspective, thank you to all of our wonderful participants who've joined us today and our amazing panel of experts. My main calls to action to you today are, my colleagues will have posted the website for Open Energy in the chat. Please take a look, share it with your friends, sign up to the newsletters, stay in touch. And to the 46% of you who said that you'd sign up to Open Energy in 2022, please do. All the details are there. Have a good day, everyone.